Good evening, YouTube. DutyRon back in tonight again with another video. And tonight we're going to talk about the missing boys, Orrin and Orson West. Went missing December 21st, 2020 from originally California City. And now they are being handled by the Bakersfield Police Department. The investigation has changed and moved over into Bakersfield, which is about 70, 80 miles outside of California City. Guys, my name is DutyRon, retired New York City police detective. I have 20 plus years in law enforcement. And if you like things all true crime related, factual, fact-based, from a law enforcement standpoint, this is the place to be. Hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell. I want to also say a special thank you to the Patreon supporters, the channel members, and all people who positively interact in all of these live streams. It's a great asset to have great folks just like yourself who support our military, who support our law enforcement, and are behind the men and women who put their lives on the line day in and day out to keep our country safe. Guys, I have some great guests for you here tonight. I have my co-host, Sergeant Bill Cannon, who's a retired New York City homicide detective sergeant. He spent 27 years in the New York City Police Department, was a 9/11 World Trade Center first responder, just like myself, and also dedicated his life to protecting the citizens of the city of New York. I also have Marc Klaas from the Klaas Kids Foundation, along with his partner, Brad Dennis. But before I get into my guest and introduce my co-host, I want to play just a really quick 2-minute video of Marc Klaas. It was about March of 2019, and it's an interview that he did basing a decision by the governor of the state of California. I won't mention his name because he doesn't deserve a mention here, but he put a moratorium on the execution of 700 or so death row inmates. And it's an outrage. It's an outrage when any governor of any state releases any prisoner that is convicted of murder of a police officer or child or any kind of extreme circumstances. And I hope and pray that it doesn't come to that. I hope and pray that there's a change of heart here with this situation. But I'm going to play this quick video for you. Please watch it. It is about the Polly Klaas story, and it's Mark talking and speaking his mind. I think it's important that we all see this.
It's a case that changed so many lives for parents and kids, including mine as a girl growing up in Northern California. More than 20 years ago, in 1993, a 12-year-old girl was having a slumber party with her friends in her mother's home. She was kidnapped and killed. Her name was Polly Klaas. Her killer, Richard Allen Davis, is still alive and sitting on death row. And now with executions on hold, he won't be going anywhere. It's hard to really understand the impact unless you're one of the victim's family members. I drove to Sausalito today to meet Polly's father, who was absolutely devastated knowing there's a possibility that monster could live longer than him.
People were really invested in my daughter, and it did last. It went on for 65 days.
It was a case that captivated so many.
I never met Polly before, but she became my child just like she became everybody else's child.
In 1993, 12-year-old Polly Klaas was having a slumber party with her two friends when she was kidnapped.
I find it very hard to recall the details of the time that Polly was missing. I was so freaked out. I mean, I was so afraid.
Later on, a man named Richard Allen Davis would confess to killing her.
That's one thing I could never forget is when they told me that.
In 1996, Davis was sentenced to the death penalty. Today, he's still alive and waiting.
I would like for the last thing for him to see would be my eyes, just like the last thing that my daughter saw.
There's now a twist to that sentence her father thought would happen eventually. He found out when he got called up for a meeting with the governor Tuesday afternoon.
And near the end of the meeting, he said, well, we have to talk about the death penalty. And then he let it be known in no uncertain terms that there would be no executions, at least to the best of his power, during his administration. I died a little bit when I heard that. I became viscerally angry.
The next day, on Wednesday, The governor signed an order on executions. The governor says the death penalty is ineffective, irreversible, and immoral. Marc Klaas sees it as fair.
And I pointed out to him that means that there's a very good chance that Polly's killer will live longer than me.
More than 20 years has passed since his daughter's killer got his sentence. More than 25 years since he last saw his girl.
She loved her sister. She loved people. She was just a light, the light of my life.
Now he's left feeling blindsided, not knowing if justice may ever be served.
I and every other family member of one of their victims should have the expectation that at some point in time, justice will be served.
Joshua J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan were reported missing.
Tonight, a nationwide search for two missing children.
Their mother and stepfather
Sorry
are
about that,
considered
folks.
persons of interest.
In Idaho.
I'm just a retired New York City police officer. I'm not an expert at this, but that gives you guys a very good overview of what took place in 2019. And that, for anybody, nonetheless, a victim of such a heinous crime like this, this is just unexcusable. Just terrible, terrible situation. I want to introduce my next guest, my co-host, Sergeant Bill Cannon. Bill, thank you so much for being in here.
It's great to be here, especially with your esteemed guest, Marc Klaas. I have only read about him and seen him on TV, but it's great to be on the same podcast with him.
Yes. And again, we saw Mark with Bayan Wang, 23 ABC over in Bakersfield, and that prompted me to get hold of him. And without further ado, I want to introduce Marc Klaas. Thank you so much for being here, Mark.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Ron and
Yes,
Bill. Thank you both.
Guy, and please, Mark, I apologize for the little technical difficulties. Like I said, I'm just a retired detective trying to do a podcast here. So it happens. Listen, so many of our viewers here asked me while we were covering these two missing boys from California City, now Bakersfield, get a hold of Marc Klaas. Get a hold of him. He's got a great foundation that he runs. You want to talk a little bit about the Klaas Kids Foundation, and then we'll bring Brad on in?
Yeah, sure, Ron. We started the Klaas Kids Foundation in 1994 in response to the kidnapping, brutal murder of my daughter, Polly. And we started it with a mission of stopping crimes against children, which at the time was a very broad mission because there was really very little being done anywhere regarding laws that will specifically protect children. When the reality of what happened to Polly became known, that a little girl in her own bedroom was taken by a predatory monster who had just been released from prison for his second kidnapping, people started to get very serious about criminal justice sentencing in the United States, and it helped to create an effect where laws like 3 strikes, et cetera, were passed that were that helped to cut crime in the United States by 50%. So we pursued those kinds of goals for a long time with the Klaas Kids Foundation, but given that within a decade there was a 50% cut in both violent and property crime, we shifted our focus a little bit, and I asked Brad to come on and be our national search director. And I had first met Brad when Polly was missing. He was in the Navy then, and he was in San Francisco as part of Fleet Week. And he and some of his associates heard my plea on the radio that we needed somebody to help us search for my daughter. And Brad and some of his friends responded. The only difference is that Brad stayed with us for several weeks until he was really forced to go back onto duty. He created a lot of the protocols that exist during missing person searches, volunteer searches at that time. So I thought he would be the perfect person to come in back in 2003 and apply everything he knew to our case to any case. Now, in order for us to get involved in a case, one of two things has to happen. we have to be contacted by a family member, or we have to be contacted by the jurisdictional law enforcement agency. It's beyond our mission, beyond everything, to just insert ourselves into somebody else's case where we very may not be welcome at all. So that's where we are and what we do and why we do it.
Well, it's a fantastic mission, and it's a testament to your love for your daughter. I mean, it, like you said in one of your wording, it says we can give meaning to Polly's death and create a legacy in her name that will be protective of children for generations to come by pursuing the singular mission of stopping crimes against children. And when I read that, Mark, it gave me chills and goosebumps on my arm, because that's coming straight from the heart from a father who lost their daughter to a heinous crime, to a scum, a piece of human garbage who took her off this earth. So without further ado, I want to bring in Brad, because you spoke so highly of him, and I want to thank him for his service. Brad, welcome in. This is Brad Dennis, part of the Klaaskids Foundation. Welcome to the stream.
Thank you very much, Ron. I appreciate it.
Hey, and it's an honor too for somebody like yourself with with your service to the country. I know Bill and I, we worked with the military. We work Fleet Week every year in New York City, right, Bill?
That's right. That's right.
Yes.
We help those sailors get back to their ships at night.
They need all the help they can get.
That's right.
Yeah. But, Brad, I was impressed with what I had a phone conversation with Mark last Wednesday. And I was actually outside of a doctor's office because of COVID. They wouldn't let me and my wife go in. My son is 28 years old. So, but he had he had a thing going on. He thought he had a hernia, and we couldn't even go into the office. They were like, "You have to wait outside." So it was a good thing that happened, because Mark called me and I had a conversation with him. But he brought you up and said what wonderful, so much wonderful things about what you did and how you stepped forward day 2 into his daughter's disappearance. So I want to just, if you can, for my listening audience, we know already about your connection with Mark, but could you walk us through a little bit of what the motivation was and how you came aboard to help him and his wonderful family out?
Yeah, I mean, it was it was the evening of I think October 2nd when we saw Mark on TV asking for help. Just asking and pleading for anyone that had any experience in search and rescue to be able to come out and help. And obviously, that's something that is near and dear to our hearts. Anyone that serves in the military, law enforcement, I mean, we're there to serve. And here was a unique opportunity for us to go and serve this family that was literally reaching out on national TV for help. And so it was very important for us to be able to go do that. But it also had a very profound effect on me. You guys will totally understand that. You get a mission, you get a case, you're all about that case. Even when the family gets close to you, you're still about that case. But it's a different thing when you're living with that family for 3 weeks. You're staying in the same hotel. You're riding in the car every single day. You see the hope that today's the day we're going to find my daughter. It has a profound effect, and it has changed mine and my entire family's life.
Right.
Mark and Brad, I just wanted to say that the work you've done over the years has helped tremendously, because right now the tide is turning and people are seeing they're going on the side of criminals. There's a thing with de-carceration, where they're trying to empty the prisons and parole all really dangerous people out there. In New York City, we have bail reform, and not just New York City, other places. So it's almost like, the criminal justice system is siding with the criminal instead of the hardworking, tax-paying civilian and these children out there that could become victims of these parolees who are monsters. They're not good guys, as these politicians will try to convince you of. These are bad people, and I don't know if I believe in parole, period, for certain violent crimes. In New York City and in New York State, our governor is releasing cop killers that were sentenced to 100 years. He's letting them out. One of them is the San Francisco district attorney's father, who killed 3 people in the Brinks robbery in Rockland County a long time ago.
And that tells you everything you need to know of the San Francisco district attorney's father. I mean, that's, and I can tell you quite frankly, I don't think that the fruit falls far from the tree.
I'm sure it doesn't. And his mother, Catherine Bowden, is teaching at Columbia University. She's already been paroled.
My God.
Yeah. So that tells you also.
I got to tell you, gentlemen, it's a dangerous road that they're going down, because not only will we see the result of this, the generations after us will see it. Our grandchildren, our great grandchildren. It's a domino effect that is so dangerous and so deadly. Look at what happened in 1993. This guy was a two-time loser, right? Let out on parole, Richard Allen Davis, and look at what the heinous crime that he committed against Polly. I mean, it's just, for me, now here we are 27 years later. Fast forward 27 years, it's supposed to be better. And we're not getting anywhere. We're not making any headway. Let's talk about the foundation. What is the mission statement? Mark, you took this thing on. Both you and Brad just hit the ground running in the name of your daughter. Talk about some of your accomplishments, some of the things that you are doing.
Well, I don't know. I mean, accomplishments, everything is a collaborative effort, it seems to me. And I think Brad will agree with that we've been involved in many, many cases that have been solved. We've been involved in many legislative efforts that have been successful. But I'll tell you, Ron, I'll tell you what I think. I think that Polly's death and the significant uproar afterwards, and I think some of the lobbying that I did, played a significant part in changing the crime climate in the United States, and ultimately bringing that whole crime statistic, cutting the crime statistics in half. For instance, one of the things that I did in New York, and I was working with Dean Skelos, who unfortunately found himself in the wrong place at one time, and Governor Pataki on Megan's Law. And we were having a dickens of a time getting Megan's Law onto the floor of the legislature, because it was a heavily Democratic legislature at that time. And we had ultimately a confrontation with a guy named, I think his name was Sheldon Leonard. Was that his name? The Speaker of the House?
Sheldon Silver?
Sheldon
Silver, yeah.
Well, he wound up going to prison, so.
Yeah, no, I know where he belongs. And anyway, it was Maureen and myself, Maureen Kanka, Megan's mother, and myself, basically confronting this guy and saying, listen, if this was your daughter, would you be sitting back like this? Right. Or would you be demanding some kind of an action? And ultimately, I think that argument got the Megan's Law onto the floor of the legislature, where it passed handily and was subsequently signed by Governor Pataki. So we were involved in a lot of things like that for many, many years. But then different people come into power, different priorities are found, and we found ourselves where those kinds of goals were no longer being pursued, so we had to change. And that's basically when one of the things we did was ask Brad to come work for us, so that we could have maybe more tangible results, right? Having actual boots on the ground and being able to say, well, there's that missing person, whatever that might mean, and it could mean several different things, and then helping families one at a time instead of helping all of the families at one time, if you know what I mean. And there's nobody better at doing that anywhere in the country than Brad. There just isn't. He's proven himself time and time again.
Brad, you're a boss. You are a boss, Brad. Thank you for that. Mark, I wanted to say, when I was mentioning accomplishments, this was my train of thought. I look at you being instrumental in working with the Megan's Law, getting Megan's Law pushed forward, the Amber Alert system, the 3 strikes you're out. You worked with Mike Reynolds from Sacramento or Fresno. I think it was Fresno. His daughter was murdered in '92. Those in my eyes, and I guess everyone perceives it as different. You know, I respect your saying, oh, well, we won't look at it as an accomplishment. But me, I look at that and I say, that's a father that is going and moving forward and taking the strength from his daughter and keeping her memory alive by action, calls to action.
Yep.
You talk about Governor Pataki. My partner, my team member who I worked with was shot and killed on the job. He was shot and killed at 30 years old. They had a wife and 2 kids at home. I dressed his 3-year-old son for his funeral. Pataki had the death penalty in place. The killer of police officer Kevin Gillespie, that was my team member who was killed, he was facing the death penalty. And what did he do? He hung himself in Rikers Island in jail. But Governor George Pataki instituted the death penalty, and I applauded him because there are certain crimes, certain heinous crimes that deserve the death penalty. And my aunt is a Catholic nun. She is still alive to this day. She's in her late 80s. And she asked me to sign this declaration that Governor Cuomo, not Cuomo that's here now, the father, he had this declaration that if I was killed by somebody as a police officer, that I wouldn't seek the death penalty under the Catholic religion. I said to her, I love you, Aunt Joan, but I'm not signing it. Because if somebody killed you or my mother or anybody in my family or any of my police officer friends or children or anything, I can't go with it. And I took a lot of flack for it, but that was my personal belief because I, like Bill, have seen evil. We've seen the evil. The people who go out and commit these heinous murders, we respond to them. We see it. So I wanted to ask you quickly before we got into the missing boys, Mark. How were the police with you with the case with your daughter? How were they with you? How did they treat you? Because people want to know. That's some of the questions that they asked. Like, what type of interactions did you have with the police, and was it a positive thing? Were you cooperative? Everybody wants to know these things.
Well, first of all, yes, I was very, very cooperative with them. I told them right up front that they could ask me whatever they wanted, as many times as they wanted, that I'd be willing to take a polygraph exam, that I'd be willing to dance naked on the table if that's what they needed. And they definitely said they wouldn't need to go there. A couple of things happened while Polly was missing. They told me 2 different things. They said, number one, I won't hear about anything significant in the case from the media, that they'll tell me before the media tells me. And they were really good about that. Sometimes it would be 10 minutes before something appeared on a headline, but at least I heard it from them first. So I was never blindsided by any media reports. And in fact, those media reports that would have blindsided me, I was able to dismiss, knowing that I hadn't heard about it from the police, particularly in the later days when basically any reporter that found a dog bone on the side of the street would break into the newscast and say, we have breaking news on the Polly Klaas story.
Mark, it's amazing that when the media doesn't know something, they'll simply make it up. And when you know the facts, and they start reporting this crap, you're like, where did they get that from,
Well, part of it is I didn't have any facts. But the other thing that they told me, number one, that I would hear everything from them. And the other thing they told me that was very, very significant was that I had a contact within law enforcement that I could come to with anything I wanted. So I knew that I had that open communication, and I knew that they would tell me before I heard it on the media. But beyond that, it was not a good relationship, because my feeling every day for 65 days is that they need to tell me where my daughter is. They need to solve this case. And if they haven't solved it by the end of the day, then they haven't done their jobs. Now, I was looking at it through a very, very narrow focus at that time, obviously.
And very emotional.
But it really did break down our relationship. There was maybe 2 cops that I could go to. One of the police officers, one of the local captains, was trying to get my ex-wife and I back together, which was a total and complete distraction. Another one, because I knew nothing about these things, another one, Eddie Fryer, the FBI agent, I kept going to Eddie saying, Eddie, you need to check this out. You need to check this out. I heard that this is a really good place to look, and basically was taking every psychic prediction that hit my ears to the law enforcement, to the FBI, to the point where they finally had to say, you know, listen, these people never help in crimes. They don't find anybody. They basically all tell you the same thing and hope that it's somehow going to result in them getting a piece of the reward. So he very quickly set me straight on the psychics. But the relationship was absolutely horrible. A few days before we found Polly, in fact, or before the police located her remains, after they had arrested the killer, they said to me and Polly's mom that we have to get used to the idea that we'll never see her again and that she's probably dead. And I went right through the roof. I was so angry with them. I was throwing things around the room. I was really I was in such a terrible state at that point. But it turned out that everything they said was correct. But the idea that they don't share information with you, whether they have it or not, and that this can go on for months and months and months, never helps a relationship between a victim's family and a law enforcement agency.
Yeah.
Bill, you want to expand a little bit on that, on the reasoning why the police would hold stuff back?
Well, the police hold stuff back because when they do catch the eventual perpetrator, they have to have something to challenge him with when they get him in the interrogation room. And if everything is released to the press or even the family, stuff leaks out. And they won't have anything, a lot of crackpots in that case, in Polly's case, could have confessed to it. And they have to have information that's withheld that they could also eliminate people, And, when we even look at the case of the boys, a missing person case, the first place that is searched is the place where the missing person is missing from. And if it's the home, that's what the first place that is searched. And in the case of the Orrin and Orson, I don't even think that was done. So, and I'm sure that protocol was followed with Polly since she was missing from a slumber party.
There was no protocol. I mean, that's the thing. There was no written protocol for missing persons. Every cop in America knew how to respond to a bank robbery, but no cop in America knew how to respond to a predatory kidnapping. So every time that it would happen, they would reinvent the wheel. The only people that really had any experience in that were certain FBI agents that were in a certain division of the FBI. But, that's maybe a few hundred cops out of the whole country.
Right.
In fact, they ultimately ended up writing the first FBI missing children's protocol based on the crime against Polly about a year later.
Well, now, let me ask you, did they do any type of search warrants where they were searching your home, relatives' homes, or or do you don't know about that?
Oh, they didn't need search warrants to search any of our places. I mean, when I got to Eve, Polly's mom's house, the morning after she was kidnapped, I mean, the police were all over that place. And there was no problem with that. And it was the same with me. They could go to my house and see whatever they wanted. Nothing. If I'd known anything, I would have turned in my brother if I thought my brother had committed the crime. And I just wanted them to find answers. And if they can maybe find answers or eliminate me by going through all of my stuff and my history and my background, whatever. Let's just get it done and move on.
So I want to segue on to the next point of the reason why we're all here together. We're talking about the missing boys. Billy, thank you for bringing that up. Orrin and Orson West, missing since December 21st. The story of the parents, I know I saw your interview with Brian Wang, 23 ABC. You spoke on your opinions on what you felt was going on. We have two adoptive parents, the mother and father, who are not cooperating, doing the exact polar opposite of what you did in the case of your daughter. Talk about how that impedes the investigation and how that makes things look bad for everybody on the adoptive side. The parents of the adoptive, nobody is speaking to the media. There's not one media conversation other than that one day that they came out, and that was just a whole mix of bad information.
Yeah, well, in this particular case, it was a family that had just moved to a remote town outside of Bakersfield. Some short time before, the boys disappeared in the early evening. I think it was a very cold evening. Young kids together supposedly somehow got out the gate and were never seen again. And you, in a situation like that, in any situation, you need somebody to speak on behalf of the kids. And almost always the most qualified person to do that are family members. And it's important for a bunch of reasons. It's important, first of all, because you want to find your child and get them back. And hopefully you're willing to do whatever it takes to make that happen. But also, I lost my train. I'm sorry.
It's
but
okay.
Also, listen,
you're
people
100%
have to know who the kids are so they can invest in the kids, so that media will continue to report on the kids, so that law enforcement will continue to investigate. And my greatest fear was that the media would lose interest in Polly's case, which would mean that law enforcement could justify pulling way back on this investigation, which, I mean, 2 months of looking for a little girl and not having a clue where it is, that's a hard thing to justify, I think, under any circumstance. So, I mean, that's the great fear. So in this case of these two little boys having absolutely nobody speaking on their behalf just makes it almost impossible to keep the investigation moving forward and to keep interest moving forward for these two young boys.
Right. You know, people talk about screaming from the top of the rooftops every day. I know if my kids went missing, I would be on a bullhorn if I had to every day out in front of City Hall. I'd be out in front of the police department. This is not happening here, and that's what's making the people who are now invested in this, like the local folks, they're all fighting amongst each other because conspiracy theories are coming out and people are speculating and blaming, CPS and blaming the, adoption agency and blaming the police chief and blaming, because there's no communication from family. There's no updated photos. And Sergeant Cannon, you spoke about this. How important is it for updated photos for people to see what the kids look like? Not a picture from 2 years ago. And also the conversation that they had with the media, Trezell and Jacqueline West.
Well, Ron, it's very important for police departments to use the press, to help them solve the case. Because the press can, believe it or not, they have a huge reach out into the public, and they can be a huge aid to the police, but they can also be a huge hindrance when they report things that aren't true, and when they get in the investigation where they don't belong. But using the press, and that's a skill, believe it or not, to play the press like a violin, and skillful police departments do it all the time. And, as a result, they sometimes throw the press a bone when the press does things that help the investigation along.
Right. Yeah. Hey, Brad, I wanted to ask you real quick. I mean, I know you have a military background, and thank you so much for your service in the Navy. I know I didn't get into that, and I apologize for that. There's just so much to talk about with this case, but I know that your skill set with the Navy, you talked about working with the dogs, the cadaver dogs, and all of your experience. How important is that to have in a missing persons case? I mean, I'm talking about anything here in general. It doesn't have to mean these two kids but any of these cases where you get out there within the first 48 hours and do those searches. But beyond those 48 hours, now we're almost close to day 70 here with these boys. So it's gone beyond the 65 days of Polly. Is it still possible to use dogs out in the Mojave Desert? And Bakersfield is 90 miles away. Now we have all of this zonage. Talk about the hindrance that can be with the mileage in between and all the different areas these kids could have been.
Sure. Well, I mean, for every homicide detective, and I'm sure Bill will say this, They need a large toolbox to be able to apply to these cases. These canines are one set of tools. The different technology resources that we have today are other sets of tools. I'm sure that they are applying all of those tools into this. As far as time frame goes, I mean, the more time that this exists out there, especially in a desert environment, is the more time that odor has a chance to deteriorate. It's going to really depend upon what kind of resource that you're really trying to talk about. This time period going into it, as far as we are, you're probably looking at the use of, like you said, cadaver dogs, or what we now term human remains detection dogs. And they are still looking for that odor. They're looking for the odor of human decomposition. They can do that in a lot of different locations. They obviously have applied that tool set inside of one of the homes. I think that you mentioned that earlier.
Right. Yeah. That's the thing, is that everybody wants answers. Everyone's looking for answers. And just like Mark said, his relationship with the police at times wasn't good because they weren't doing their job. They weren't telling him where his daughter was. And that's human nature. Like Bill and I can tell you, when we work homicide, he's worked homicide cases. I've supplemented in the Fugitive Enforcement Division. There's families behind their cases. And Bill, you could talk more about how invested the investigation is with bringing closure for a family, finding out who did what they did to their family member. I mean, we get really in deep with the family sometimes.
There are no cases that, in my experience in homicide, that I or my team or the whole homicide squad worked harder than kid cases, because it affected us all and it became personal. And we worked it, we would stay at work as long as we had to, 3-4 days without going home, and at some point you got to go home. But kid cases were the most emotional cases to work. And I know all the investigators worked those cases harder than they did any other type of case.
Yes. And I know that from firsthand experience when I supplemented with the, hundreds of, missing persons and homicide cases through the warrant squad. Again, there's no real answer here. We're looking for pieces of the puzzle. And that's what I want to talk about next, is the reward money. I know that in this case, there's $123,000 now reward money. And the police chief in California City, I had a few conversations with him on the phone, and I saw some interviews, and he was talking about people coming in with cockamamie leads, sending his officers on a wild goose chase. That does nothing good. You have psychic mediums who are getting readings and doing this and that, and they're calling these tips in to the dispatch. And he talked about taking valuable resources, going out on kind of wild goose chases, if you will. Did you have a lot of that happen in Polly's case, Brad, or do you want to speak about it more?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have those in pretty much any time that you get a lot of high profile media attention in a case, you're going to obviously get the opposite side of what you're after. Just like Bill stated before, anytime that we can utilize the media and we utilize them correctly, and we partner the families with law enforcement and they have a joint message as they go forward, the media becomes a force multiplier. But when you are not utilizing that properly and you're not giving them the right narratives, then they're going to create the narratives. And as they create the narratives, you create all of this other stuff. Mark termed this a long time ago. It's the second wave of predators that then comes in and begins to affect your investigation. And what a lot of people don't realize is every time they make that phone call into dispatch or into 911 and report that erroneous tip, they don't realize that has to take resources away, because that investigative team has to run that tip down.
Absolutely. Right. Yep. And what, like you said, I don't think in the history of homicide has a medium or, ever solved a homicide case. So I don't know why they go to them. I have no idea why anyone would go to a medium that says, "Oh, I'm feeling this. Get out of here."
Well, they claim that they do. They claim that they solve cases all the time.
No, they don't. They absolutely
that
don't.
Soviet Brown person. Do you remember that lady?
Yeah.
I mean, she told the families of Sean Hornbeck that he was dead, And one of the missing girls in Cleveland, she told her mother she was dead. And that mother died believing her child was no longer alive. And just a year later, it was discovered that she'd been held captive for 15 years or whatever in the world it was. So, you know, the mediums are diabolical, and they are predatory. They'll tell you anything. And particularly when there's a reward involved, and Ron, you had brought up the rewards. There's generally two types of rewards that I'm aware of. There's, in a missing person case, there's a reward for the recovery of the missing person, and then there's a reward for information leading to the arrest of the individual, the arrest and conviction of the individual that committed the crime. And I think that's the reward that's probably the most vulnerable. That's where people go, well, I think Joe did it, and he's an asshole anyway, you know? And so they'll start making calls in like that. And in our case, it was a very high reward. It was a $200,000 reward. And that was a lot of money back in 1993. And the reward was for information leading to do you remember, Brad?
Was it the arrest and conviction of the perpetrator?
Arrest and conviction or the recovery? I'm not sure.
We did. There was two. So the very first one that came out was the safe return. So for the information that led to the safe return, and then it went to the arrest and conviction.
Yeah. And there were tons of abuses. There was an extortion attempt. Some guy figured he could extort $30,000 by pretending he knew where Polly was, and I mean, it was just some moron who told him to do the money drop by a park bench.
Right.
I'm going to say a choice word here. that's a sick.
I don't even know what to say. The challenges are formidable. There's no question that the challenges are formidable. But fortunately, you get experienced people working, and you get cops, you get people like Brad. Sometimes I get involved in these cases, and we understand things differently than the general public does. And hopefully we can create those partnerships that ultimately result in a recovery.
Yeah, successful. Listen, most people lose focus on what it really takes to get a successful arrest, indictment, and conviction. That's a three-part component that's not easy to do. If you don't have the right information, you don't have the right evidence, you could get someone arrested and then they could not get indicted. And then what do you have? You got a guy that's free and said, ha, 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 you locked me up, but you didn't get me indicted. Or you locked me up, I got indicted, and I beat it in a trial. So you need those three components to work. And like you said, Mark, you know, ultimately any parent, you know, wants to have their daughter or their son found if they're missing. Any adult, if their wife or husband goes missing, or, you know, family member, they want them found first and foremost. I mean, I remember I was at Citi Field with my son, and actually it was Shea Stadium at the time, and he was a little boy, and my wife said to me, you take him, but you don't take your eyes off of him. And I was behind home plate on the field, and David Wright was there, and he wanted his autograph. I think my son was five. And I was there with a bunch of cops. So it was a bunch of, you know, fellow police officers with their kids. I turned around because the guy was talking to me. Of course, I blame it on one of my friends. And little Frankie's gone. So I practically shit pants. That was for a minute and a half. And where was he? He was over by the dugout getting the signature from David Wright on the field. So he wasn't in the stadium. He was on the field behind. But that feeling that I got for a minute and a half was A, my wife was going to kick my ass. Right? I missed that bleep. And B, I was just petrified, you know, and that was for a 2 minutes max. So I could just only imagine, you know, my heart breaks for everybody and anybody that's gone through. Mark, I mean, when you called me, I was just said to myself, you know, what an honor to actually speak to somebody like yourself, because you showed and proved to America and to your family and your daughters and the world, for that matter, that nobody's going to keep you down. And, you know, you've gone forward in such a professional and dignified manner that it was just my honor to actually have you on the phone. And I'm not stroking you, because I worked in the largest police department in the world, in the United States. I've seen a lot of crime. I've seen a lot of crime victims and their families. But what you've done here with Brad and the Klaas Kids Foundation is just nothing short of just miraculous. It's a wonderful thing that you're doing because you're helping so many other people.
Well, thank you very much, Ron. And as I think you read it earlier, that we are trying to create a legacy that will protect kids for generations to come. And in fact, it was 28 years ago now. This year, it will be 28 years ago that Polly was kidnapped. So we're in our second generation of children right now. The kids of Polly's peers are the ones that are the ones that are probably listening to this show right now. And we find ourselves, as do so many other nonprofit organizations, I suppose, so many other people and businesses in this country, in a very critical time. Because once you find yourself in a situation, and this happened at 9/11, it happened in 2007, and it's happening now. There's a significant social and or economic downturn in the country. And the first ones to suffer that economic downturn oftentimes are the charities. Because as generous as people are, and as much as they want to give, once the going gets tough, it gets much more difficult to do that. So I would just like to remind your audience that if they do support the work that we do at the Klaas Kids Foundation, they can log on to our website, which you're showing here, Klasskids.org. And there's a donate button right at the top, and we appreciate any support we can get from anybody. We also sell merchandise. We sell what I think is arguably the coolest red hoodie on the face of the earth. And they're easy to order right from our website. I know I wear mine all the time, and I know Brad's been known to do so as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I have the website up here, and I'm going to link it for those of you who are here. There's 950 people watching this live stream right now, so we have close to 1,000 folks. I want to say a special thank you to everyone who has put in the chat wonderful comments towards Mark and Brad and my co-host Bill Cannon and myself. I appreciate the love and support that you guys have given, but this is the Klaas Kids Foundation. I'm just trying to get to the screen where I was. Okay. I want to get to the donate. So there's a donate button. You said it's at the top. I'm looking at the main page. Oh, here it is, support. So you click the support the Klaas Kids Foundation, and it brings you to this screen right here. And here's the donate. I'll put it up so everybody can see it. I'm going to link this donate button. It's going to take you probably right to a PayPal or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Yep, there it is. I am going to donate tonight on behalf of the DutyRon channel, $250 to the foundation. It's my way of saying thanks for everything that you do. It's a small way of saying thank you for everything that you've done here tonight and continue to do, spreading the word and the message of how to keep your kids safe. And that's one of the last things I want to talk to you about. There's a spot on your website where you talk about children's safety, identification, the DNA kits. Can you talk about that and how that came about, or was that your doing, Brad, or what happened there?
No, actually, that was my wife that put all that together. She wanted to do a couple of things happen. She wanted to do a child ID kit, which made a lot of sense. So we put one together. It's got safety information. It's got form fields to fill out. It's got a little ink pad so that you can take your kid and attach their fingerprints to it. And also, we tell them to attach a recent picture to the kit as well. And then if they ever need it, they can give it to law enforcement to kickstart the investigation. And it also has a list on the back of things that we think parents can do also to encourage people to look for their child and help them get them back. Then the DNA thing was something entirely different. This was something that was being sold all over America in these ridiculous little kits at the time. They cost anywhere from like $5 to $200, and I don't know, none of that made a lot of sense to us. So I went to the California DNA lab and I said, look, just using common household goods, can't a parent secure their child's DNA in case they ever need it. And if we were to do that, how would we do it? And within 15 minutes, they said you need a tiny little Ziploc bag. You need a Q-tip that is that's pristine. Yeah, you need a Q-tip that's pristine, and you need to let it air dry for 20 minutes, and that's it. So we bought thousands of those, and anybody that wants a do-it-yourself DNA kit can contact our foundation, and we'll send them to you. The same thing with the ID kits. We send out up to 5 ID kits at a time.
Yes, and some of the moderators have been putting it in the chat, but if the moderators can put that in, it's Klaas, Klaas, kids.org. 2020 year in review. I'm on that section in the website. It says, despite unprecedented healthcare and political challenges in 2020, represented the Klaaskids Foundation's most productive, busiest year in the field. I found that to be, for me, surprising, because I would have thought the opposite. 179 calls for service and assistance from 19 different states. 36 search and rescue / recovery missions. 46 endangered, missing / trafficking cases in 2020. 38 missing person consultations. 59 high-risk / large-scale operations. 41 volunteers. 18 canines. 152 days deployed. 78 children and 19 adults located safely. 12 missing persons recovered. That is unbelievable right there. That is amazing. Amazing.
That's all on this guy right here.
Brad, I tip. I don't even have a cap on, but I'm tipping it to you.
We have an incredible team, but the one thing that is important to also notice is every bit of that's done free of charge to every agency that we serve, every family that we serve. There is never a cost to any of them.
Wow,
that's fantastic. You know what, DutyRon, I just wanted to say something. As Brad picks up the ball here and runs with it into 2021 and beyond, I think you really have to keep the pressure on this whole philosophy of decarceration and this philosophy that parolees are good guys and that prison inmates belong home with their families. Yet we have to also hit the criminal justice system and say, look, we understand about criminal justice reform, but letting bad people out of prison isn't reform,
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, and I mean, we believe that, and we work on that, but there's no social stomach for incarceration right now, and I don't know. I know in California, it's the ultra liberal wing of the Democratic Party that seems to be calling all of the shots on these things. They've eliminated cash bail. They've emptied the prisons of incredibly dangerous people. There's no accountability within the criminal justice system anymore. And I almost believe that it's going to take another incredibly high-profile, tragic case of probably another missing children to get this thing back on the road again. Because like I say, this was 28 years ago. There hasn't been a really, really high profile missing kid case in this country probably since Elizabeth Smart back in 2002 now. So, people need to get fired up, and I don't know that there's a better way to get people fired up. And I'm so sorry I have to say this because I've been there and I know how awful it is. Then to have to have the nation face a family's personal tragedy raw, like they did in our case, just raw. And who knows? But it's a pendulum, guys. It's a pendulum that started off way on the left and it moved into our direction for quite some period of time, and now it's just swinging all the way back again. It's a really sad thing because it means a lot of people will suffer.
We just have to hope that there's a lot more good people fighting the bad guys than there are bad guys out there.
There are.
Right. Yep. Yeah, there are. But there are. Like I said in the beginning, and I think Brad, Mark and Bill, I think you guys can agree with me, it's a dangerous road we're going down. And, like you said, criminal justice reform, I'm all for it, but not when we're talking about these heinous criminals. I want to just end on a quick note here. There's a lot of people in the chat that are asking questions, and I've kind of ignored the chat a little bit tonight. So I want to say special thank you to everyone who supports and who is positively interacting. My moderators are putting in the Klaaskids Foundation. I implore each and every one of you, there's almost 1,000 people here, go on over to Mark's Foundation and Brad. Support these gentlemen. There's probably dozens upon dozens of other people behind the scenes that work the phones, that take calls, that coordinate stuff. And I mean, these two guys are behind it, but there's plenty more that are behind the scenes that you may not ever hear about. And they're all equally as important to just these two gentlemen here. Mark is the chief, and now he's got Brad. He's passing the torch over to Brad. This is just a wonderful, wonderful foundation that's helping so many people. Whether it's not in person, sometimes, and now in the day and age of this COVID, it may be by phone or by the internet, but they're providing assistance to people when people reach out to them. And like Mark said, they can't go and stick their noses into people's cases. They got to be called in and got to be asked by the families to help. So I wanted to just also get maybe a final thought from you on maybe some advice for the people of Bakersfield, Mark and Brad. I'll let Mark take it first, and then Brad. The people of Bakersfield and California City, they're hurting. They're trying to search every week. They're going all over the place looking for where are the boys. I donated $3,000 from my channel as the reward money builds. I put up that. I also sponsored a billboard over in the Tehachapi area. That was a great digital billboard with the boys on there. What can you guys offer, Mark, first for the folks that are on the ground that are trying to help the families? Because there are the biological family looking for these kids every day.
Well, every location that they search is eliminating where the boys might be. And given that there's no assistance coming from family members or from law enforcement, my best advice would be to make sure that in those searches that they do, that they're organized, that they understand what they're doing, that if they find potential evidence, you don't tamper with it. You notify the authorities that you have found that evidence, and not to give up hope on these kids, because they're in some kind of shape someplace, and they deserve to be found, and they deserve to be treated with some dignity and respect. And that if the family won't show that, then it's up to the rest of us to do so.
Correct. Thank you.
Right. Well, one of the things that we've always said, and it started with Polly's case, at least for us, is that every time that a child does go missing, it doesn't just affect that family, it affects the entire community. I think we're seeing that in both of those communities over there. I saw where they are going out and running community searches. My advice would be to sit down, especially now that it's a new investigative team, and whoever's coordinating those searches, to sit down with the investigative team. Make sure that you are focusing on secondary locations, not priority search areas. But make sure that while you are working those areas, that we are doing the due diligence of documenting it correctly, that there's some training that goes into it for all of your volunteers. If that's something that you want help with, at least understanding what that training looks like. And it doesn't have to be long, but just enough to make sure that they know how to deal with the situation and potential evidence once they do find it, because the last thing we want to do is to mess up a case or mess up the investigation. But if that's something that interests you, or you need that, if you're organizing it, then by all means reach out to the foundation. You can go onto our website and send us an email, and my team will be happy to be able to send you some information over.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Brad. And so for those of you who are just tuning in or watching the replay, Brad just said if you need assistance in getting searches together and organizing, he's there to help. And that's what makes the Klaas Kids Foundation a tremendous asset to anybody that's boots on the ground and that's putting in these hours and days, and there's people out there every day. Bill, any final thoughts for the folks? For our
I mean, I'd like to thank Marc Klaas for doing everything that he does, and for Brad, who's going to pick up that football and run with it in the future. These guys do fantastic work, and believe it or not, even politically, guys like you force the needle to move a little further to the right in this crazy leftist world we're living in right now. And you're the voice of reason when it comes to a lot of these violent criminals getting out of prison.
Thank you for that.
Thank
Bill.
you.
Yes, and gentlemen, I would say this. You have an invite at any time that you have a message or anything that you want to get out. I'm going to promote your foundation through my through the comment section and through the description down below. That'll stay there forever. But I hope that you guys will consider coming back and joining us on some other cases that we might that we might take on. And it was an honor and a pleasure having Marc Klaas and Brad Dennis. I appreciate your time. It's an hour. I promised you 35 minutes. So I'm sorry, gentlemen. There was a lot to cover. But yes, special thank you to each and every one of you here. I always like to end these by saying God bless the world, God bless the United States of America, and God bless each and every one of you here in the chat. Thank you for joining, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.